Continuing on this story, also during the tour, Meghan has spoken about all the trolling that she's experienced since marrying into the royal family. So let's take a little look what she had to say.
For now 10 years, every day for 10 years, I've been bullied and attacked. And I was the most trolled person in the entire world. Man, woman. I'm still here. And so when I think of all of you and what you're experiencing, I think so much of that is having to realize that, that industry, that billion-dollar industry that is completely anchored and predicated on cruelty to get clicks, that's not going to change. So you have to be stronger than that.
Bryony, imagine being the most trolled person in the world. What that must do for you mentally.
I mean, I know I get trolled by proxy for defending Meghan and Harry. Back in 2018, I've spent a lot of time with Meghan, and she was crying on me because of what she was experiencing. And all I have to say is that, well, I have a lot to say, is that what I know of Meghan bears no resemblance to this kind of villain that has been created in the comment sections.
Yeah.
And I think it says so much more about this culture that we live in, as she said in that clip, where cruelty is sort of, we need to make villains of people. People often say to me what they like. What do they like in real life? And I'm like, well, they're really nice. They're normal people. And they're like, you would say that, you know them. And I'm like, well, what? They are, it is horrible, the sort of level of vitriol that is levelled, particularly at Meghan, right?
And ultimately, what has she ever done, really and
this
truly?
is the thing.
What, has she murdered anybody?
No.
She hasn't done anything, really. And also the fact that, it's very telling, the fact that you're telling me that you get trolled for supporting Meghan. That is actually quite sad.
I get called the most awful things. Now, what Meghan said to me once was that she's like, I don't expect everyone to like me. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not deluded. I don't want everyone to like me. But there is an element of like, just be polite, And there's this...
Hello, dear ones, and welcome back. Before we dive into today's story, one that has been 10 years in the making, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. It helps us keep telling the truth. And I promise you won't want to miss what we're about to uncover. Now, let's begin. For nearly a decade, the world has been told a story about a duchess who was too outspoken, a prince who loved too openly, and a couple who dared to walk away from the most famous institution on earth. That story, we now know, was never quite true. It was a narrative built by tabloid editors hungry for clicks, palace courtiers protecting an ancient system, and online trolls hiding behind anonymous accounts. But something is changing right now, in April 2026, and it's happening in Australia, where the sun is warm, the crowds are massive, and for the first time, the British media is finally admitting what they got wrong. This is seismic, because for years, the same newspapers that profited from tearing Meghan down are now acknowledging she was treated unfairly. It's April 18th, 2026. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are in Australia, not as working royals or exiles, but as themselves. Authentic, unfiltered, unbroken. They're championing mental health, women's safety, Indigenous rights, and community healing. But something unexpected is happening. The crowds are enormous, tens of thousands. Families holding banners reading, "We love you, Meghan," and "Harry, you chose bravery." Young girls wearing faux pearl earrings, copying Meghan's style. Aboriginal elders welcoming them with traditional ceremonies. And everywhere, genuine warmth. On a stage in Australia, surrounded by people who came to listen, Meghan spoke words that stopped the world. She said, "For now, 10 years, every day for 10 years, I've been bullied and attacked, and I was the most trolled person in the entire world, man or woman. I'm still here." 10 years, 3,660 days of cruelty, death threats, racial slurs, comment sections filled with venom. But she didn't break. "I'm still here," spoken not with anger, but with quiet, unshakable power. She spoke about the toll, the sleepless nights, the billion-dollar industry built on her pain. Her suffering was monetized. Her tears were currency. And then something remarkable happened. The British media began to acknowledge what the public had long suspected. On a mainstream British morning show, a guest said plainly, "I think it's called misogynoir, misogyny and racism." "I think so, absolutely." The host didn't argue. They agreed. After years of headlines painting Meghan as difficult, demanding, a diva, the conversation finally shifted to the truth. She was targeted because she is a Black woman and because she refused to be silent. A white woman in her position might have been called eccentric, but Meghan was held to an impossible standard and punished for failing. The morning show also featured Meghan's friend, Bryony, who said, "What I know of Meghan bears no resemblance to this kind of villain that has been created in the comment section." The comment section created a villain. The real Meghan, who sends handwritten notes, who shows up for friends, never existed there, because cruelty sells and kindness does not. Bryony added, "People often say to me, 'What are they like in real life?' And I'm like, well, they're really nice. They're normal people." Normal people. They order takeout, argue about diapers, worry about their kids. A family that was hunted. And yet here they are in Australia, smiling, holding hands, refusing to become bitter. That is the strongest thing a person can do. Now let's talk about the human behind the headlines. One of the most powerful moments in that morning show segment came when Bryony spoke about knowing Meghan personally. She said, "What I know of Meghan bears no resemblance to this kind of villain that has been created in the comment section." That's the gap between the real Meghan, who sends handwritten notes and stays up late to comfort a friend, and the caricature painted by algorithm-driven outrage. Another guest, Charles, shared his wife's advice. "Why are you looking at that machine? I now don't look at it." And there's a choice to be made. A choice. But as the host said, ignoring cruelty is hard when it's happening in the next room. That puts too much onus on the person. Yes, the burden should never fall solely on the victim. That's why calling out racism matters. That's why naming misogynoir matters. Silence is not a solution. It's a permission slip. So let's return to that Telegraph headline. What the royal family is missing. What are they missing? Connection, authenticity, the ability to laugh at oneself, the courage to hug a stranger without worrying about protocol. They are missing the future, because the future of any monarchy is not in stiff collars and rigid curtsies. It's in the messy, beautiful act of showing up as yourself. Meghan and Harry are not perfect, but they have something that cannot be bought or inherited. The trust of people who feel seen by them. That is more valuable than any crown. The media landscape is shifting, slowly, but undeniably. Even the Telegraph is asking what the monarchy is missing without them. Why? Because the public got smarter, because people started following Meghan's lead and stopped looking at the machine, because the algorithms that rewarded outrage are being challenged by communities built on compassion, and because Meghan and Harry never stopped doing the work. They didn't retreat. They built. They launched. They loved. They raised Archie and Lilibet away from the cameras, but not away from purpose. Meghan ended that speech in Australia with 3 words. "I'm still here." Not, "I survived," not, "I forgive you," just, "I'm still here." That is not a victim statement. That is a victor's. It says, "You tried to bury me, to break me, to erase me, and I am still standing. I am still speaking. I am still loving. I am still here." And beside her, always, is the man who chose love over legacy. Together, they built a life beyond the palace walls. Not a perfect life, but a real one, where the morning shows can finally admit the truth, because the truth was always there. It just took the world a little longer to see it. The British media called it a tour, but it was never just a tour. It was a reckoning. Misogynoir, racism, unfair bullying. These words were once whispered. Now they are being said on morning television. They are being printed in the Telegraph. They are being heard. And at the center of it all, calm, strong, and still standing, is Meghan and Harry. Together. This is not the end of their story. It is the beginning of a chapter where the world finally catches up to what the Sussexes have known all along. That love is not a weakness, that speaking out is not a crime, and that no amount of cruelty can extinguish a light that refuses to dim. They're still here, and they're not going anywhere. Thank you for watching. If this touched you, please subscribe, share, and leave a comment with hashtag #IamStillHere. Until next time, stay kind, stay strong, and always choose the truth. So let's talk about the Telegraph. For years, this newspaper was among the most vicious critics of the Sussexes. Their comment sections were battlegrounds. Their headlines were designed to provoke outrage. They platformed anonymous palace sources who painted Meghan as difficult and delusional. They never asked for proof. They just printed and profited. But look at what they published during this Australia tour. The headline reads, "Harry and Meghan's Australia tour shows what the royal family is missing. Duke and Duchess win over large crowds down under despite facing backlash in lead-up to visit." What the royal family is missing. Not what they're doing wrong, not another publicity stunt, an admission, a recognition. The Telegraph, a bastion of traditional British media, admitted the Sussexes bring warmth, connection, and the ability to move people. That is everything. The article notes they won over crowds despite facing backlash. That word "despite" implies the backlash was external, perhaps even unfair. It implies the Sussexes succeeded not because of the system, but in spite of it. And then there's the quiet detail that speaks volumes. The Telegraph offered readers the option to gift this article free. They wanted this positive story to spread without a paywall. That is an olive branch, a small acknowledgement that maybe they had been part of the problem. But let's be honest, the media didn't invent this cruelty in a vacuum. They were fed. And the source, whether directly or through silence, was the royal institution itself. On that same morning show, the host asked, "What has she ever really done? Has she murdered anybody?" It cuts to the bone. The punishment never fit the crime. The crime was existing as a biracial, American, divorced, ambitious woman who refused to curtsy to a system that never intended to protect her. What did she actually do wrong? She ate an avocado. She closed her own car door. She hugged fans. She wore dark nail polish. And for these non-crimes, she endured a decade of daily abuse. Leaked emails and investigative reporting have revealed that senior palace staff regularly briefed against Meghan. They planted negative stories to distract from other scandals. They let her take the fall. And when Harry tried to defend her, he was labeled captive, brainwashed, difficult. The palace never once issued a statement correcting the record, never once stood up for a woman who married into their family with hope and love. This is the disturbing light the royal family finds itself in, not because of anything the Sussexes did, but because of what they refused to do, protect one of their own. When other royals faced criticism, the palace machine swung into action. Briefings were issued, lawyers were deployed. But for Meghan, silence. Then anonymous briefings blaming her for the silence. The morning show guest, Charles, who has been trolled for defending Meghan, shared this. "My wife said to me about 2 years ago, 'Charles, why are you looking at that machine?' I now don't look at it. And there is a choice to be made." A choice. That's the power they're reclaiming. But as the host rightly pointed out, ignoring abuse is easier said than done when it's happening in the next room. It's like knowing that in the next room, people are being awful about you and saying, just ignore it. That puts too much onus on the person. Yes, the burden of ignoring cruelty should never fall solely on the victim. That's why naming Misogynoir matters, because silence is a permission slip. And Harry? He chose her. Every time. He gave up his military titles, royal patronages, security, country, family, inheritance, home, his entire childhood identity. That is not a man who was manipulated. That is a man who saw his mother's tragedy replaying, a woman destroyed by the press while the palace watched, and refused to let history repeat. He looked at Meghan and saw Diana, and he said, "Not again. Not my wife, not my children." That is love. That is bravery. And yet, he was mocked for it, called weak for protecting his family. Our world has truly lost its way.